Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Sacred Depths of Nature, How Life Has Emerged and Evolved, 2nd edition, by Ursula Goodenough, narrated by Suzie Althens. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Personal, 1997. 1st edition. No question about it. I'm writing this book because of my father. He started out as a Methodist preacher, but became obsessed, with a need to understand why people are religious. As professor of the history of religion, he poured out book after book on the ancient Jews and early Christians, their art, their texts, their motivations. And then he brought it all home, to me, sitting there after dessert, trying to look inconspicuous while he and the other Yale scholars drank a great deal of wine and held forth on Plato and Paul and Freud and Sartre. Dad began his famous undergraduate course, The Psychology of Religion, by announcing, "I do not believe in God." He ended one of his last books by admitting, "I still pray devoutly, and when I do, I forget my qualifications and quibbles and call upon Jesus, and he comes to me." He was a larger-than-life father, passionate and outrageous and adored. When he died of cancer when I was 22, it was almost more than any of us could bear. I went to college with 1950s expectations: find a husband, raise 2 children, and continue to read novels. But everything changed when I took Zoology 1 as a distribution requirement. Nothing in my girls' school training had led me to understand that creatures are made up of cells and genes and enzymes, that life evolves, that kidneys control blood electrolytes. I was astonished. Better still, I was good at it. And Dad was quite as excited about my unexpected calling as I was. Ursula, a scientist. How splendid! What a father. For the next 25 years or so, I played it straight. Biology professorships, research projects, federal grants, graduate and undergraduate teaching. I still do all those things, and with as much pleasure and satisfaction as ever. But as my 5 children grew, and there was more time for myself, my father's question returned. Why are people religious? And then, why am I not religious? But was that true? What is being religious anyhow? What about the way I feel when I think about how cells work or creatures evolve? Doesn't that feel the same as when I'm listening to the St. Matthew Passion or standing in the nave of the Notre Dame Cathedral? So I joined Trinity Presbyterian Church and spent the next decade singing in the choir, reciting the liturgy and prayers, hearing the sermons, participating in the ritual. I came to understand how this tradition, as played out in a middle-class, mostly white congregation, is able to elicit states of serious reflection, reverence, gratitude, and penance. But all of it was happening in the context of ancient premises and a deep belief in the supernatural. What about the natural? Was it possible to ground such religious sensibilities in the context of a fully modern, up-to-the-minute understanding of nature? And so I started reading and listening and reflecting, and out of it has emerged this book. Certainly, the most important dialogue has been with Loyal Rue, who has explained to me most of what I understand about theology and philosophy, and who has insisted that we scientists speak of what we know and feel. Early on, I happened onto an improbable collection of people composing the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, IRIS. And while the input of many in IRIS has been seminal, this is particularly true for Jean DeKilly, Connie Barlow, Michael Kavanagh, Tom Gilbert, Ward Goodenough, Phil Hefner, Bill Irons, Saul Katz, Ted Lawrenson, Carl Peters, Bob Scheibel, and Barbara Whitaker-Johns. Kirk Jensen of Oxford University Press has provided generous and unwavering support. Carl Smith has helped me understand and experience the religious impulse. John Heuser has continuously infused his perspectives and wisdom. Sini Berhanu and Jeannie Heuser have nurtured my spirituality. Pam Belafonte, Elizabeth Marincula, Sharon Olds, and Betsy Weinstock have nurtured my courage. My children, Jason, Mathea, Jessica, Thomas, and James, bless my life in countless ways, and no one can emerge from a consideration of religion without thanking William James. Personal, 2022, 2nd edition. In the 25 years since I wrote the first edition of this book, I continued as a biology professor for 20 years, and then retired to Martha's Vineyard to celebrate my remaining years within oak forests, abutting wetlands, and the open ocean. Along the way, I taught cell biology and evolution courses, participated in exciting scientific research with wonderful colleagues and trainees, and welcomed 9 grandchildren. But after the book was published, I acquired a second life. As an advocate for the religious naturalist orientation, I spoke at numerous venues: college seminars, sermons, church basement discussion groups, conferences, book clubs. I wrote journal articles and blog essays and was interviewed and reviewed. I joined others in founding the Religious Naturalist Association, RNA, that in 2022 has some 900 members in 50 states and 40 countries. I shared ideas and feelings with those who embraced the religious naturalist trajectory and with those who offered critiques, thereby greatly expanding and clarifying my understandings. My second life has been both exhilarating and humbling, and the many new ideas and perspectives presented in this second edition were incubated in this rich context. The mentors, supporters, and family whom I acknowledged in 1997, most of whom, although sadly not all, are happily alive and well in 2022, are thanked again for their invaluable input and their continued belief in me. The concept of emergence anchored much of the first edition, but Terry Deacon and Jeremy Sherman have greatly expanded my understanding of its dynamics in their writings and in many conversations. Over the years, I have greatly benefited from the wisdom and support of Claude Bernard, Thomas Berry, Rachel Cowan, Susan Dutcher, Terry Finley, Carol and Daniel Goodenough, Joan Goodwin, Billy Grassi, John Grimm, Sam Warnachia, Joe Heitman, Michael Hogue, Esther Hopkins, Michael Colton, Jason Kuhn, Kent Kenninger, Todd McAllister, Sandra Mazer, Sabia Merchant, Jennifer Morgan, Janet Newton, Bill Orm Johnson, Irving, Sarah, and Alessandra Petlin, Lynn Quarmby, Edmund Robinson, Robin Roth, Jeremy Rutledge, Sue Savage Rumbo, Barbara Smuts, J.D. Stillwater, Tricia Swift, Brian Swim, Mary Evelyn Tucker, Sabina Waffenschmidt, Carol Wayne White, Wesley Wildman, Paul Woodruff, and Michael Y. Session. I have also greatly benefited from the insights posted on IRIS and RNA social media forums. And my grandchildren, Isabella, Delilah, Oliver, Lola, Zora, Luciano, Theodore, Leonardo, and Henry, bless my life in countless ways. Introduction. When people talk about religion, most soon mention the major religious traditions of our times, but then, thinking further, most mention as well the religions of indigenous peoples and of such vanished civilizations as ancient Greece and Egypt and Persia. That is, we have come to understand that there are, and have been, many different religions. Anthropologists estimate the total in the thousands. They also estimate that there have been thousands of human cultures, which is to say that the making of a culture and the making of its religion go together. Each religion is embedded in its cultural history. True, certain religions have attempted, and variously succeeded, in crossing cultural boundaries to convert the heathens, but the invaded cultures usually put their unmistakable stamp on what they import, as evinced by the pulsating percussive Catholic masses sung in Africa. In the end, each of these religions addresses two fundamental human concerns: how things are and which things matter. How things are is articulated as a cosmology or cosmos, how the natural world came to be, how humans came to be, what happens after we die, the origins of evil and tragedy, and natural disaster and love. Which things matter becomes codified as a morality or ethos, the Judaic Ten Commandments, the Christian Sermon on the Mount, the Five Pillars of Islam, the Buddhist Vinaya, the Confucian Five Relations, and the understandings inherent in numerous indigenous traditions. The role of a religion is to integrate the cosmology and the morality, to render the cosmological narrative so rich and compelling that it elicits our allegiance and our commitment to its attendant moral understandings. As a culture evolves, a distinctive cosmos and ethos appear in its co-evolving religion. For billions of us, back to the early humans, the stories, ceremonies, and art associated with our religions of origin have been central to our lives. I stand in awe of these religions. I have no need to take on their contradictions or immiscibility, any more than I would quarrel with the fact that Scottish bagpipe ceremonies coexist with Japanese tea ceremonies. And indeed, the failure of Soviet Marxism to obliterate Russian Orthodoxy, and of Maoism to obliterate Buddhism, Confucianism, or Taoism, and of Christianity to obliterate indigenous understandings, reminds us that projects designed to overthrow religious traditions face strong headwinds. My concern is very different. As I witness contemporary efforts to generate planetary consensus, I see many high-minded and earnest people attempting to operate within an amalgam of economic, military, and political arrangements, and I find myself crying out, "But wait, where is the religion? What is orienting this project besides fear and greed? Where is the shared cosmology and the shared morality?" That we need a planetary ethic is so obvious that I need but list a few key words: climate change, ethnic cleansing, fossil fuels, habitat and species preservation, human rights, hunger, inland waterways, infectious disease, nuclear weapons, oceans, pollution, population pressures. To my ear, conversations on these topics are largely cacophonies of national, cultural, and denominational self-interest. Without a common religious orientation, we basically don't know where to begin, nor do we know what to say or how to listen, nor are we motivated to respond. My agenda for this book is therefore to outline some possible foundations for such a planetary ethic, an ethic that would make no claim to supplant existing orientations, but would seek to coexist with them, informing our global concerns while we continue to orient our daily lives in our cultural, religious contexts. Any planetary foundation needs to be anchored in a shared worldview, a culture-independent, globally accepted consensus as to how things are. From my perspective, this part is easy. How things are is, well, how things are. Our science-based understandings of nature, the Big Bang, the formation of stars and planets, the origin and evolution of life and sentience on Earth, the very recent advent of language-based consciousness in humans, and the concomitant evolution of human cultures. As science-based inquiry continues, our current understandings will deepen and evolve, but a core narrative is in place. The universe is a single reality, one long, sweeping, spectacular process of interconnected events. The universe is not a place where evolution happens. It is the evolution happening. It is not a stage on which drama unfolds. It is the unfolding drama itself. If ever there were a candidate for a universal story, it must be this story of cosmic evolution, The story shows us, in the deepest possible sense, that we are all sisters and brothers, fashioned from the same stellar dust, energized by the same star, nourished by the same planet, endowed with the same genetic code, and threatened by the same evils. This story, more than any other, humbles us before the magnitude and complexity of creation. Like no other story, it bewilders us with the improbability of our existence, astonishes us with the interdependence of all things, and makes us feel grateful for the lives we have. And not the least of all, it inspires us to express our gratitude to the past by accepting a solemn and collective responsibility for the future. Loyal Rue. This, I believe, is the story that can unite us, because it is true for us all. It is everybody's story. But that potential carries a crucial caveat. A cosmology works as a religious cosmology only if it resonates, only if it makes the listener feel religious. Yes, the beauty of nature, sunsets, woodlands, birdsong, readily elicits religious responses. We experience awe and wonder at the grandeur, the poetry, the richness of the natural world. It fills us with joy and thanksgiving. Our responses to accounts of the workings of nature, on the other hand, are often far less positive. The scientific accounts of how things are, and how they came to be, are more likely, at least initially, to elicit alienation, disenchantment, enemy, and nihilism, rather than the celebration just offered by Loyal Rue. Such responses are not likely to motivate allegiance or a spiritual, ethical orientation. This alienation has several sources that are considered in various chapters of the book. Here I suggest that a primary source derives from the way that scientific understandings are commonly presented. The language of scientists, while conveying essential precision and depth to other scientists, too often conveys a view of the natural world that can feel cold and mechanical to the outsider. Moreover, the language is often obscure, generating the understandable response that, "I can't get my mind around all that stuff." And alas, our science curricula in the schools, while often creative and stimulating, have all too often been experienced as difficult, dry, and boring, except for those science nerds who were good at it. This book, therefore, seeks to present an accessible and engaging account of our science-based understandings of nature, with a focus on planetary life, and then suggests ways that this account can elicit abiding, fulfilling, and joyous religious responses, generating what has been called a religious naturalist orientation, an orientation poised to participate in the development of a planetary ethos. Once we experience a solemn gratitude that we exist at all, share a reverence for how life and the planet work, and acknowledge an imperative that both continue to flourish, our conversations will be infused with intimations of the sacred depths of nature and our responsibility to nurture that which we deem sacred. A key component of any religious cosmology is its focus on the human. Even as we acknowledge that our advent on the planet was but an evolutionary moment ago, even as we gaze into the heavens with urgent questions about our significance, the significance and future of humankind remain central to our religious sensibilities. The religious naturalist orientation has no problem here. Being at home with our natural selves is the prelude to both morality and ecomorality, and there are many ways to see human beings as noble and distinctive, even as we are also animals who are inexorably part of the whole. A planetary ethic must be anchored both in an understanding of human nature and an understanding of the rest of nature. This, I believe, can be achieved if we all start out with the same kinds of perspectives on how human nature flows forth from whence we came. How this book is put together. A Lutheran-raised friend, who read an early draft of the first edition of this book, remarked that it was set up like a daily devotional booklet, also found in evangelical and Catholic traditions. A daily devotional, he explained, contains a collection of short Bible-based stories, each followed by a religious meditation on the story's theme. While I wasn't familiar with the genre, that's basically how the chapters of this book are constructed. Each chapter begins with a story about the dynamics of nature. Most are about biology, since that is what I best understand, and most are about biology at the level of molecules and genes and cells, since this is what cries out to be understood. The stories recount what has been called the epic of evolution, or journey of the universe, or, my favorite, everybody's story. Our current understandings of the origins of the universe and the planet, the origins of chemistry and life, the workings of cells and organisms, the patterns of biological evolution and the resultant biodiversity, awareness and feelings, sex and intimacy, multicellularity and death, human evolution, and morality and ecomorality. Throughout, I have done my best to bridge C.P. Snow's two cultures, persons fluent in science-based worldviews versus persons oriented within the arts and humanities. For those not well versed in scientific concepts and terminology, I have tried to render my accounts accurate, understandable, and meaningful. Those who know the terrain will, I hope, find themselves engaged by the analogies and storylines that are used to explain the familiar. I often use anthropomorphic language in these descriptions. Amino acids prefer to do something, and enzymes recognize something, because that's how we humans think. We follow narratives with protagonists that have agency. Indeed, biologists use analogies and metaphors all the time. We speak of orphaned receptors and proteins that serve as chaperones and genes that hitchhike. While we hold robust science-based understandings of the molecules and mechanisms of which we speak, it's usually easier to communicate those understandings in carefully chosen anthropomorphic frames that convey the essence of a process. Then, at the end of each story, I offer a short response, the analog of the Christian meditation, as a non-theistic religious naturalist. These reflections draw heavily on traditional religious concepts and on readings and conversations. But in the end, each reflection is personal, describing the particular religious or spiritual sensibility elicited in me when I think about a particular facet of the story. For example, the existence of the cosmos invokes in me a sense of mystery. The exuberance of biodiversity invokes humility, and an understanding of the evolution of death offers me helpful ways to think about my own death. If the religious naturalist orientation is to flourish, it will be because other writers find themselves called to reflect on the dynamics of nature from their own cognitive, experiential, and cultural perspectives, in which case, this book will become one of a series of daily devotionals. Human memory, they say, is like a coat closet. The most enduring outcome of education is that it creates rows of coat hooks so that later on, when you come upon a new piece of information about something, you have a hook to hang it on. Without a hook, the new information falls on the floor. Some readers with scanty scientific backgrounds have told me that while they were reading one of my stories about nature, it felt like they understood everything I said. But the next day, they could scarcely remember a thing about it. No hooks, I explain. Then I remind them that there isn't going to be a test, and that as they were reading, they were creating hooks for their next encounters with scientific explanation. And then the important part. The point of hearing a story for the first time is not to remember it, but to experience it. Chapter 1. Origins of the Earth. Infinities and Infinitesimals. To our knowledge, everything in our universe, including the Earth and its living creatures, obeys the laws of physics, laws that became manifest in the first moments of time. Much of what we know about the physical universe, like the curvature of space-time and the behavior of subatomic entities as both particles and waves, is very difficult to conceptualize, even for people who spend their lives thinking about such things. Richard Feynman. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. As physicists and mathematicians probe ever more deeply, they present us with ever more mind-boggling concepts, like the idea that subatomic particles may in fact be minute, vibrating superstrings of space, that our four-dimensional universe may actually be 10 or 11-dimensional, that the observable universe may be much smaller than the true universe, and that there may be other universes besides our own. We are introduced to other stars that also have orbiting planets, and presented with ever more bizarre observations about black holes. We learn that ordinary matter, the subatomic particles and luminous atoms that we and the Earth and the stars are made of, is only approximately 5% of the universe. Much of the rest, approximately 25%, is enigmatic, dark matter, which doesn't interact with light, nor with ordinary matter in any way except through gravity. And most, approximately 70%, is the even more enigmatic, dark energy that participates in the expansion of the universe, characterized by a physicist friend as pushy-outy stuff. Fascinating as these known and speculative manifestations of physics may be, they are not central to our story of life. Why? Because when Earth life was coming into being, some 10 billion years after the universe had come into being, the laws of physics were a given. Life had no choice but to originate and evolve in the context of quantum indeterminacy and quarks held together by gluons and gravitational and magnetic fields and thermodynamics. Therefore, while the laws of physics underlie all of life and constrain what can and cannot occur in living beings, we can describe how life works without referring to them, in much the same way that we can describe what a painting looks like without referring to the light absorption spectra of its pigments. What is central to the origination of Earth life is the history of the universe, the cosmic dynamics that have yielded our galaxy, our star, our planet, and the atoms that form living beings. We can tell the story sparingly, without pausing to define terminology, allowing the flow of events to suggest the enormous times and distances involved. The universe story. The observable universe is currently estimated to be 13.8 billion years old. In the beginning, everything that is now the universe, including all of its ordinary matter and dark energy, was concentrated in a singularity, smaller than the size of a pinhead, that was unimaginably hot, 100 nonillion degrees Fahrenheit by some estimates, and unimaginably dense. It all let loose during an event called the Big Bang, a misleading term in that there wasn't an audible explosion. Instead, the singularity expanded very rapidly, carrying all the matter and energy with it, accompanied by an event called cosmic inflation that created inhomogeneities in the expanding space. During the first 3 minutes of this expansion, all sorts of high-energy physics took place that yielded the current tally of subatomic particles in the universe, including single protons, hydrogen nuclei, neutrons, and electrons. A small portion of the protons and neutrons went on to fuse into helium nuclei, and an even smaller proportion into lithium nuclei. And then things started to settle down, with the space continuing to expand and cool until, after approximately 400,000 years, temperatures were low enough that the hydrogen and helium nuclei could acquire electron shells and become stable hydrogen and helium atoms. The expansion continued for another 13.8 billion years to yield the present observable universe, estimated to be 60 sextillion miles in diameter. Once hydrogen atoms formed, the stage was set for the creation of galaxies and stars. The spatial inhomogeneities that had formed during cosmic inflation were amplified by the gravitational properties of dark matter, creating huge lumps called dark matter halos. Hydrogen atoms fell into the centers of these halos and initiated star formation. The gravitational field of each protostar pulled the hydrogen atoms closer and closer together.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?